allowing for Al Azhar University in Egypt and Plato's Academy. Really, the first great universities were in Paris and then Oxford. And shortly after that, Cambridge. And there's a big debate between Oxford and Cambridge about who is first. I don't think it's a realistic debate. We know Oxford was first. But antiquity does not necessarily confer authenticity or um, importance, except in terms of a timeline. In the case of Oxford, I think Oxford genuinely is an important university and continues to be. I was at Oxford. I have great fondness for Cambridge in many ways. I think Cambridge today is what Oxford seemed to be like 40 years ago. But all of these universities, and particularly the more recent universities in the UK, are in danger because of a lack of investment, because of efforts by this present government's ideology to cut back on international students, because of a drop off in students from Nigeria, India, Bangladesh, and of course, because of the absence of students from the EU. So, for most national, indigenous students in the UK, in the next decade, or already they're being taught at a loss, or they're being accommodated at a loss in these universities. By the end of the next decade, it's going to be about a £5,000 loss per student. That loss is being picked up by foreign students who traditionally are paying the full fees, significantly more, and so the absence, the trickle of movement away from universities in the UK by foreign students is going to have a huge effect on the quality of education. Fees are going up. The salaries of senior management are going up. The salaries of bureaucracy is going up. The tutors, tutors in Oxford and Cambridge, I can tell you from experience, are paid little to nothing. And there will come a point where that will be challenged. It's often considered a reward simply to be given a job, even if there's not very much money to go with it. And it's difficult to get by as a tutor, even a lecturer in one of the great universities, unless you have tenure, and that's rare. And the same can be said actually for universities around the world. They are they treat their staff appallingly. The backup staff, the administrative staff, tend to get treated better because they're there for the long haul, but the actual academic staff are in a sort of revolving door. It doesn't do anybody any good. Sources of funding are few and far between. The UK is spending significantly less per student than the OECD average. And research, the money spent on research is going down. The private sector is paying significantly more than the government. And when you look across at Europe, Germany, Switzerland, the Netherlands, much of the research cost goes to industry collaboration, compared to about 10% in the UK. And Brexit has cut off a lot of the EU funding streams which universities were already relying on. Even if the UK has now rejoined Horizon Europe, that's Horizon Europe rather than Horizon Post Office. I think it's not impossible that we are going to see a university in the UK facing bankruptcy. Um, and and what the headlines that are grabbing attention are the absurd headlines where, for example, York University decides to um, cut back on the entry requirements for foreign students to try and encourage more foreign students to come to the university. Well, if it's cutting back on the entry requirement for foreign students, should it not be cutting back on the entry requirement for national students? Um, I don't see any way round this problem except for offering the sort of degrees that foreign students will want. And those degrees tend to come with an option to stay in the country and practice the skills that have been taught. And that is an option which is increasingly being ruled as inadmissible, as impractical in government terms. So you do your degree and then you clear off. At the moment, there is still an option for 2 years work experience working in a company after graduating, but that is such a tenuous situation, and it's a very fragile situation. I don't think one can assume it's going to continue. I wish it were, because if we've trained somebody, then we want them to stay. In the same way as if we train a doctor, we want them to stay, whether they're from Algeria or Southampton. And keeping them in the NHS is very difficult when we're paying them so little. So there's a link between universities and professional careers. But our universities are failing.